What if everything you've heard about the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation is completely wrong? While the media keeps throwing out new names, one reality is quietly taking over, and it's making a lot of people uncomfortable. Because this isn't just a competition anymore, it's a shift in power. And just wait, because what happens next could change everything for this franchise, and not everyone is ready for it. For months, the narrative around the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation felt like complete chaos. Every week a new name, every day a new solution. One moment it was a draft prospect, the next it was a veteran comeback story. It became a cycle: confusion, speculation, and constant noise. But now something has changed, and not everyone is talking about it. Because suddenly, the same voices that once doubted Shedeur Sanders are starting to shift their tone. Quietly, subtly, almost like they don't want you to notice. The criticism hasn't fully disappeared, but it's no longer as loud, and that raises a serious question: what made them change? Not long ago, the idea of Shedeur leading this team was being dismissed. Some analysts questioned his readiness. Others hinted that the spotlight around him was too big, too distracting. There were debates about whether the Browns needed someone more proven, more stable, more safe. And every time his name came up, it felt like it came with an asterisk. But now, those same conversations are starting to sound very different. You're hearing phrases like "he showed flashes." You're hearing "he deserves first-team reps." You're even hearing insiders admit that the most realistic path forward might actually run through Shedeur. That's not a small shift, that's a complete reversal of the narrative. And what makes it even more interesting is how it happened. There wasn't a massive announcement, no dramatic press conference, no viral headline that forced the change. Instead, it happened slowly, almost quietly. A comment here, a report there, a subtle adjustment in tone, until suddenly the conversation wasn't about replacing him anymore, it was about building around him. But that's where things start to get complicated. Because while some media members are adjusting, others are still holding on to the old narrative. They're still pushing new names, still suggesting alternatives, still acting like the answer is somewhere else. And that contradiction, it's creating tension between what's being said publicly and what might actually be happening behind the scenes. Some fans have started to notice it too. The shift feels real, but it doesn't feel fully accepted. It's like the conversation is changing, but not everyone is ready to admit it out loud. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because when narratives start shifting without a clear explanation, it usually means one thing: something bigger is happening underneath the surface. Something that hasn't fully come out yet. Something that could redefine how this entire situation is viewed moving forward. And if that's true, then this isn't just a media switch-up. This might be the beginning of a completely different story. But here's the part nobody saying out loud: if this shift is real, then the next move won't just surprise people. It could force everyone to rethink everything they believed about this team. At first, it didn't look like a major decision. No headline announcement, no breaking news alert. But if you really paid attention to what the Cleveland Browns were doing behind the scenes, the message started to become impossible to ignore. Because sometimes, what a team doesn't do tells you everything. Free agency came and went. Big-name quarterbacks were available. Trade rumors floated around. And yet nothing, no aggressive push, no desperate move, no last-second gamble to bring in a safer option. For a franchise that's been known to chase quick fixes, that silence felt unusual. And that's where the conversation quietly shifted. Instead of searching for an outside answer, the Browns seemed focused on something else entirely: building internally. Strengthening the offensive line, looking at weapons in the draft, making moves that don't scream quarterback upgrade, but instead scream support system. Now think about that for a second. You don't build around uncertainty. You don't invest in protection and weapons if you're planning to replace the guy under center. Those kinds of moves usually mean one thing: you already believe in who's there. And that brings everything back to Shedeur Sanders. Because while the media kept throwing out names, the front office stayed quiet. And that silence, it's starting to look a lot like confidence, not the loud, public kind, the controlled kind, the kind where a team already knows the direction it wants to go and doesn't feel the need to explain it. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Reports began to surface, nothing officially confirmed, but enough to raise eyebrows. Some insiders suggested the Browns weren't even seriously exploring top quarterback prospects this year. Others hinted that internal discussions were more focused on development than replacement. And if those reports hold any truth, that changes everything. Because it suggests this isn't an open competition in the way people think. It suggests the battle might already be leaning in one direction, not officially, not publicly, but structurally. Still, not everyone is buying it. Some analysts continue to question whether this approach is risky, whether passing on proven options could backfire. And to be fair, those concerns aren't coming out of nowhere. The Browns have taken chances before and not all of them worked out. So now you've got two narratives colliding. One says the team is quietly committing to a young quarterback and building for the future. The other says they might be overlooking safer, more proven paths. And until something becomes official, both sides have just enough evidence to keep the debate alive. But that tension, that uncertainty, that's exactly what makes this moment so important. Because when a franchise stops chasing noise and starts moving with intention, it usually means a decision has already been made. They just haven't said it out loud yet. And if that decision really is locked in behind closed doors, then the next reveal won't just confirm it, it's going to catch a lot of people completely off guard. It didn't come from a headline, it didn't break across every sports show. In fact, if you weren't really paying attention, you might have missed it completely. But when the insiders started talking about the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation, the tone felt different. Not louder, just more honest. Because instead of speculation, you started hearing something much more grounded, what actually gives this team the best chance to win. And that's where things took a turn. One insider, speaking from direct observation around the team, didn't dance around it. He didn't throw out 5 different scenarios or hide behind vague possibilities. He said the most realistic path forward, the one that actually makes sense based on the current roster, is for Shedeur Sanders to take that next step. Not a veteran signing, not a last-minute draft gamble, not another reset. Him. And that matters more than people realize. Because insiders don't speak like that unless they're seeing something consistently behind the scenes. Practices, film sessions, locker room dynamics. The things fans don't get access to. When someone close to the situation points in one direction that clearly, it's usually based on more than just a few highlight plays. It's about trajectory. And according to those same observations, Shedeur isn't just another name in the room, he's the one with momentum. The one who showed flashes late. The one who, if things break right, could actually stabilize a position that's been anything but stable for years. But here, where it gets even more interesting. The same conversations also made it clear this isn't guaranteed. There's no promise being made, no official stamp saying this is the guy. Instead, it's being framed as the best-case scenario for the Browns moving forward. And that wording, it says everything. Because it tells you the organization isn't blindly forcing a narrative. They're watching, evaluating, letting it play out. But at the same time, they're quietly hoping that the answer they already have becomes the answer they don't need to go searching for. Some fans have picked up on that shift, others are still skeptical. And honestly, both sides have a reason to feel that way. Because we've seen flashes before from quarterbacks in this league that didn't turn into anything long-term. We've seen hype build only to collapse under pressure. So the hesitation, it's real. But so is the opportunity. Because if the insiders are even close to being right, if Shedeur truly is the most realistic path forward, then this isn't just about development anymore. This is about a franchise quietly aligning itself around a single outcome and waiting to see if it becomes reality. And once that alignment starts happening, it's very hard to reverse. But here's the part nobody's fully ready for: if those insider signals are accurate, then the competition might already be decided, and the rest of the league just hasn't caught on yet. It sounds almost unreal when you say it out loud. How does a quarterback go from buried on the depth chart to possibly leading an entire franchise in less than a year? But that's exactly the situation unfolding inside the Cleveland Browns. Because not too long ago, Shedeur Sanders wasn't even part of the main conversation. He wasn't QB1, he wasn't QB2. At one point, he was sitting as low as fourth on the depth chart, an afterthought in a room filled with more proven names and safer expectations. And usually, players in that position don't get real opportunities. They get limited reps, garbage time snaps, maybe a brief moment if everything else collapses, but rarely do they get a real chance to change the narrative. Rarely do they get the kind of opportunity that actually matters. But then something shifted. Injuries, inconsistency, underperformance, call it whatever you want, but the door cracked open. And instead of hesitating, Shedeur stepped into that moment, not perfectly, not flawlessly, but confidently enough to make people start paying attention. And that's where the climb began. Game by game, the conversation slowly changed. At first it was small, analysts pointing out flashes, fans noticing composure under pressure, a throw here, a drive there, nothing overwhelming but enough to plant a seed. Then the reps increased. And with more reps came more responsibility, more pressure, more eyes watching every decision. And this is where most young quarterbacks either rise or fade out completely. But Shedeur didn't disappear. He stayed steady, made key throws, showed control in moments where chaos usually takes over. And even when things weren't perfect, there was something about his presence that didn't look temporary. It didn't look like a placeholder. It looked sustainable. And that's when the real shift started happening behind the scenes. Because coaches notice consistency before the public does. Teammates feel confidence before analysts admit it. And once that internal belief starts building, everything changes. The reps aren't just opportunities anymore, they become evaluations for something bigger. Suddenly, the fourth string label didn't matter. Suddenly, the question wasn't can he play, it became how far can this go? But here, where things get complicated. Because jumping from fourth string to potential QB1 doesn't just create excitement, it creates tension. Veterans don't just step aside. Media narratives don't flip overnight, and expectations, they grow fast. Now, instead of being overlooked, Shedeur is being watched closely. Every throw matters more. Every mistake gets magnified. The same people who once ignored him are now analyzing every detail of his game. And that pressure, it's a completely different challenge. Because proving you belong is one thing. Proving you can lead is something else entirely. But that's exactly where this story is heading. From the bottom of the depth chart to the center of the conversation to possibly becoming the face of the offense. It's not a typical rise, it's not a safe progression. It's fast, unpredictable, and filled with risk. But sometimes those are the stories that change everything. And if this rise continues the way it has so far, then what started as an opportunity might turn into something the Browns and the entire league never saw coming. The tension inside the Cleveland Browns quarterback room isn't loud, but it's impossible to ignore. Because on the surface, it's being labeled as an open competition. Multiple names, multiple paths, multiple possibilities. But once you start looking closer, that label begins to feel a little misleading. Because not every competition is actually even. At one point, this room looked crowded with uncertainty. Veterans with experience, young players with potential, and a front office that, at least publicly, refused to commit to anyone. It gave the impression that anything could happen, that any quarterback could rise, take control, and run with the job. But over time, the balance started to shift. And at the center of that shift is Shedeur Sanders. Because while others in the room bring different strengths, experience, past success, or theoretical upside, Shedeur brings something that's harder to measure: momentum. He's the one who actually played meaningful snaps recently. The one who showed flashes when the situation wasn't ideal. The one who kept improving while everything around him felt unstable. And that matters more than people think. Now compare that to the rest of the room. There's experience, yes, but it comes with questions. Can it still translate at a high level? Can it adapt to a new system? Can it stay consistent over a full season? Those aren't small concerns. And even if the answers are maybe isn't always enough when a team is trying to define its future. Then there are the younger options, developmental players, names that sound intriguing on paper. But development takes time, and time isn't always something teams are willing to wait for, especially when there's already someone in the building who's further along in that process. And that's where the real divide starts to form. Because while the competition is being framed as wide open, the reality might be much more narrow. Not officially, not publicly, but structurally. The opportunities being discussed, the reps being hinted at, the way insiders talk about the situation, it all subtly points in one direction. Still, the team isn't closing the door on anyone. Publicly, they can't. That's why you keep hearing phrases like "everyone will get a chance" or "we're evaluating all options." It keeps the room balanced, it keeps players engaged, and maybe most importantly, it avoids creating unnecessary controversy before a final decision is made. But some fans believe there's more to it. Some believe that certain narratives are being maintained on purpose, that keeping the idea of competition alive helps manage expectations and keeps pressure off the player who might already be leading behind the scenes. Others think it's genuinely undecided, that the Browns are still searching, still evaluating, still unsure. And honestly, both interpretations have some logic to them. Because until something is officially announced, everything exists in that gray area between possibility and reality. But here's what makes this situation different. When you step back and look at the full picture, the recent performances, the lack of aggressive moves to bring in outside competition, the subtle shift in how insiders discuss the room, it starts to feel less like a wide-open battle and more like a slow transition. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just gradual. And those are the situations that catch people off guard the most. Because by the time the final decision becomes public, it doesn't feel like a surprise to the people who were paying attention. It feels inevitable. And if this really is a quiet transition instead of a true competition, then the moment they make it official won't shock everyone, it'll confirm what was already happening behind the scenes. The conversation around the Cleveland Browns didn't explode overnight, it slowly turned. And strangely enough, it all comes back to something that doesn't sound dramatic at all: first-team reps. Because for the longest time when people brought up Shedeur Sanders not getting consistent first-team reps, the reaction was immediate, dismissive, almost aggressive. The argument was simple: he hasn't earned it, or that's not how development works. And if you questioned it, you were told you didn't understand football. But now, those same conversations sound very different. Suddenly, analysts are saying things like, he needs a full offseason. You're hearing, chemistry with the starters actually matters. And maybe the biggest shift of all, people are openly asking why he wasn't getting those reps earlier in the first place. That kind of reversal doesn't just happen randomly. Because first-team reps aren't just about practice, they're about trust. They're about timing with receivers, command in the huddle, understanding protections at a different speed. You don't give those reps to someone you're unsure about, and if you don't give them, that sends a message too. And that's where the controversy really started building. Some fans believe Shedeur was held back longer than he should have been. That despite showing flashes, he wasn't given the same runway others have received in similar situations. Others argue the opposite, that the team was being cautious, making sure he was fully ready before handing him that level of responsibility. Both sides have a point. Because rushing a young quarterback can ruin development, but delaying opportunity can also slow momentum. And in a league where timing is everything, getting that balance wrong can change the entire trajectory of a player. But here, where things get even more interesting. As the offseason progressed, the tone didn't just shift, it almost flipped. The same people who once downplayed the importance of first-team reps are now emphasizing them, strongly, almost like it's suddenly become the missing piece in this entire situation. And that raises a bigger question. What changed? Some fans believe it's simply hindsight, that once people saw what Shedeur could do in real game situations, the earlier decisions started to look questionable. Others think it's deeper than that, that the internal evaluation within the Browns organization may have evolved, and the public conversation is just catching up. There's also another layer to this. Reports and discussions suggest that this upcoming offseason could finally give Shedeur what he didn't have before: a full stretch of first-team reps, consistent preparation, and actual continuity with the offense. And if that happens, it removes one of the biggest uncertainties surrounding his development. No more limited opportunities, no more partial evaluations. Just a clear, uninterrupted look at what he really is. But that's also where the pressure intensifies. Because once a quarterback gets those reps, real reps, the excuses disappear. There's no more "he didn't have enough time" or "he wasn't working with the starters." Everything becomes visible, every decision, every read, every mistake. It becomes definitive. And that's why this moment matters so much. Because this isn't just about correcting a past decision or adjusting a development plan. This is about setting the stage for a final evaluation, the kind that determines whether a player is a long-term answer or just another chapter in a long list of questions. And inside a franchise that's been searching for stability at quarterback for years, that kind of clarity is everything. But the reality is, not everyone is comfortable with how this has unfolded. Some still question whether the delay hurt more than it helped. Others wonder if the sudden shift in narrative is happening a little too late. And then there are those who believe this was always the plan, that the Browns wanted to test him under pressure first before fully committing. And until we see how this next phase plays out, all of those perspectives remain in play. Because in the NFL, development isn't just about talent. It's about timing. And now that the timing finally seems to be aligning, the next phase won't just answer questions. It might expose whether this entire situation was handled perfectly or completely misjudged. If you really step back and look at what the Cleveland Browns are doing right now, it starts to feel less like a series of random moves and more like a calculated strategy that just hasn't been fully revealed yet. Because on the surface, it still looks uncertain. You've got a quarterback room with multiple names, you've got public statements about competition, you've got media debates that keep circling back to the same question: who's actually going to lead this team? But behind all of that noise, the actions tell a different story. Start with what they didn't do. They didn't aggressively chase a big-name quarterback in free agency. No major signing, no headline move, no attempt to bring in a veteran who would immediately take control of the room. And in today's NFL, where teams panic quickly at the quarterback position, that kind of restraint stands out. Then look at the draft approach. Instead of locking in on a top quarterback prospect, the focus seems to be shifting elsewhere: offensive line, weapons, overall roster strength. That's not the behavior of a team desperately searching for a new QB1. That's the behavior of a team preparing to support the one they already have. And that brings everything back to Shedeur Sanders. Because whether they've said it publicly or not, the structure being built right now points in his direction. Not loudly, not officially, but consistently. And this is where the strategy becomes clear. Rather than forcing a decision early and dealing with the backlash, the Browns appear to be letting the situation develop naturally. They're keeping the language neutral, keeping the competition open, allowing media narratives to run in different directions. Why? Because it buys them flexibility. If Shedeur takes that next step, it looks like a smart, patient development plan. If he doesn't, they can pivot without having publicly committed too early. It's a controlled approach, one that protects the organization no matter how things play out. But some fans believe there's more to it than just flexibility. Some believe the Browns are intentionally lowering expectations publicly while building confidence internally. That by not declaring Shedeur as the guy right away, they're reducing external pressure and giving him space to develop without the full weight of the franchise on his shoulders. Others see it differently. They think the team is still unsure, that this isn't a strategy, it's hesitation, that the Browns are keeping all options open because they don't fully trust any single outcome yet. And honestly, both interpretations have merit. Because what we're seeing right now sits right in that gray area between planning and uncertainty. But here's what makes this situation so fascinating. When you combine the lack of external moves, the focus on strengthening the roster, the shift in insider conversations, and the increasing emphasis on development, it starts to look less like indecision and more like alignment. A quiet alignment. The kind that doesn't need to be announced because it's already happening. And that's usually how major transitions in the NFL unfold, not with a single moment, but with a series of small decisions that all point in the same direction. By the time the final piece falls into place, it doesn't feel sudden. It feels inevitable. But there's still one layer that hasn't fully played out yet. Because strategy only works if the execution matches the plan. Building around a quarterback is one thing. Proving that quarterback can actually deliver when everything is in place, that's something else entirely. And that's the part nobody can predict. Not the media, not the fans, not even the organization itself. Because at some point, all the planning, all the patience, all the controlled messaging, it all leads to one moment where the player has to step forward and prove that the belief was justified. And until that happens, this strategy remains just that, a strategy. But if this plan is as intentional as it looks, then the next phase won't just reveal the quarterback, it'll reveal whether the Browns were quietly building something smart or setting themselves up for a massive gamble. The reality around the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation is starting to separate from the expectations, and not everyone is ready to accept what that means. Because for months the expectations were loud. Fans expected a big move. The media expected a new name. Analysts kept pushing the idea that the answer had to come from the outside, someone proven, someone safer, someone who could immediately stabilize everything. That was the narrative, that was the belief. But reality has been moving in a completely different direction. There's been no major signing, no aggressive trade, no desperate attempt to reset the position again. And the longer that continues, the harder it becomes to ignore what's actually happening behind the scenes. Because when a team chooses not to act, that is the action. And right now, all signs keep pointing back to Shedeur Sanders. Not as a backup plan, not as a temporary option, but as the most realistic path forward. And that's where the tension begins. Because expectations don't disappear overnight. There are still people who believe the Browns should bring in competition, that they should draft another quarterback, that relying on a young player with limited experience is too risky, especially for a franchise that's been searching for stability for years. And to be fair, those concerns aren't wrong. We've seen this story before across the league. A young quarterback shows flashes, the hype builds, the expectations rise, and then when everything is placed on their shoulders, things don't go as planned. It happened enough times that skepticism isn't just understandable, it's expected. But here's the part that complicates everything. While the outside world is still debating what the Browns should do, the organization appears to be quietly deciding what they are going to do. And those two things are no longer aligned. Because internally, the focus seems to be shifting toward development, continuity, and building around what's already in place. Externally, the conversation is still stuck on replacement, upgrades, and alternative options. That gap, it's where confusion starts. It's where fans begin questioning the direction. It's where media narratives clash with insider reports. And it's where every small update gets overanalyzed because nobody feels like they have the full picture. But maybe that's the point. Some believe the Browns are intentionally letting that gap exist, that by not fully committing publicly, they're controlling expectations while keeping flexibility. Others think it's simply a result of uncertainty, that the team hasn't fully made up its mind, and the mixed signals reflect that. Either way, the result is the same. Two different realities existing at the same time. One where the Browns are still searching for answers, and another where they might have already found one. And this is where everything comes down to one simple question. What happens when expectation finally meets reality? Because if Shedeur steps into this role and performs the way some insiders believe he can, then the entire narrative flips overnight. The doubts disappear, the criticism fades, and what once looked like a risky decision suddenly looks like a calculated one. But if it doesn't work, then all those expectations that were ignored come rushing back, louder, stronger, and with a lot less patience. That's the risk. That's the pressure. And that's why this moment matters more than anything that's happened so far. Because up until now, everything has been controlled: messaging, development, strategy. But once the games start, none of that matters anymore. At that point, it's just performance. And performance is the one thing you can't shape with narratives. So while the conversation continues to shift, and while expectations continue to collide with reality, the truth is this situation is heading toward a moment where everything becomes clear. No more debates. No more speculation. Just answers. And when that moment finally arrives, it won't just decide a starting quarterback. It could decide whether the Browns trusted the right reality or ignored the one that mattered most. There's a version of this story that nobody in the Cleveland Browns world seems fully comfortable saying out loud yet, but you can feel it building underneath every conversation. Because at some point, all the debate, all the speculation, all the what-if scenarios, they stop mattering. And what's left is the truth. Not the media version, not the fan theories, the actual reality of the situation. And right now, that reality is quietly pointing in one direction: Shedeur Sanders. Not because it's been officially announced, not because the team came out and declared it, but because everything around the situation keeps aligning that way: the lack of aggressive moves, the focus on building the roster elsewhere, the shift in how insiders talk about the future. It's all adding up. But here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. If this is true, if Shedeur really is the direction this franchise is moving toward, then it means a lot of people were wrong. It means the constant search for the next guy was unnecessary. It means the debates about replacing him, the endless lists of alternative quarterbacks, the idea that the Browns had to look outside the building, all of that starts to fall apart. And that's not an easy thing for people to admit. Because this wasn't just a small opinion, it was the dominant narrative for months. That the Browns needed saving at quarterback. That the answer wasn't already there. That someone else had to come in and fix everything. But what if that assumption was never fully accurate? What if the Browns weren't scrambling for a solution, they were just waiting for the right moment to reveal the one they already had? That possibility changes everything. Because now, instead of asking who's going to be QB1, the question becomes, how long has this already been decided? And that's a completely different conversation. Some fans are starting to lean into that idea, others are still skeptical. And to be fair, that skepticism isn't going anywhere until it's proven on the field, because potential is one thing, execution is another. But the shift is happening. Quietly, gradually. And once a narrative starts shifting like this, it rarely goes backwards. Because the truth has a way of surfacing, whether people are ready for it or not. And in this case, the truth might be simpler than anyone expected. The Browns might not be searching anymore. They might not be waiting. They might already know. And if that's the case, then everything we've been watching over the past few months, the debates, the rumors, the constant noise, it wasn't building toward a decision. It was distracting from one. And if that's really what's been happening this entire time, then the moment they finally say it out loud won't be a surprise. It'll be confirmation that the truth was right in front of everyone, and most people just refuse to see it.